The sun dipped low on the horizon, painting the fjords of Scandinavia in a soft, golden light that seemed almost unreal, as if the world itself were holding its breath. From the quiet villages nestled among the jagged cliffs, the wind carried whispers of the sea, its endless expanse, its restless waves, its promise of adventure beyond the familiar shores. To the men and women of this land, life was harsh but known. The forests were dense, the winters bitter, the work relentless. Yet even within the rhythms of toil and survival, a restlessness lingered, a pull toward something just beyond reach. It was as if the very earth and sky conspired to remind them that the world was far larger than their small, stone-built homes. The edge of the known world was not marked on any map, yet it existed vividly in the minds of those who dared to dream. Stories traveled along the coasts and up the rivers, carried by merchants, travelers, and old skalds with voices like wind through pine needles. Tales of distant lands, strange people, and seas that shimmered with colors unseen inspired awe, but also fear. And yet, for the Vikings, fear was never quite enough to stay their hands or anchor their hearts. The call of the unknown stirred something deeper than curiosity. It awakened a hunger, a longing, a sense that to stay rooted in the comfort of home was to remain incomplete. The sound of waves crashing against rocks became a kind of music, a rhythm that spoke of possibility. Each crack of a wave, each spray of salt water on weathered skin, reminded those who listened that the world extended far beyond the fjords and valleys they knew. They had heard the legends of lands where the sun dipped late into the winter, of forests so vast and silent that one could walk for days without encountering another soul, and of mountains that scraped the clouds themselves. These were not simply stories to be told by the hearth. They were invitations, challenges, and promises of glory and discovery. To venture beyond the familiar was to risk everything, yet to ignore that call was to betray the spirit that coursed through their veins. From the prow of a longship, the sea stretched endlessly, its horizon a delicate line where water met sky. There, the imagination could run wild, unfettered by the constraints of hearth and home. The sailors, men who had grown up hearing sagas of gods and giants, of cursed treasures and heroic deeds, felt a mingling of trepidation and exhilaration. Each wave they faced seemed like a question posed by the universe. Would they dare to follow its path, to meet whatever lay at the farthest reaches of the world? The ships themselves seemed almost alive, responding to the rhythm of hands on oars, to the subtle shift of wind in their sails. The sea demanded respect, demanded vigilance, demanded courage. And in return, it offered the possibility of seeing what no one else had seen, of touching the edge of the world itself. Life in the villages had its own quiet beauty, yet the monotony of routine, fishing, hunting, building, and tending to the fields, made the call of the horizon all the more compelling. Even in moments of warmth by the fire, when laughter and song filled the longhouse, there lingered a sense of something missing, a yearning that could only be answered by movement, by exploration. Children stared at the distant waves with wide eyes, imagining creatures that might lurk beneath, ships that might come from nowhere, and lands that might challenge all they had ever known. The elders, with their weathered faces and deep-set eyes, told stories not only to entertain but to instruct, to plant seeds of courage and imagination in the next generation. Every tale was a subtle reminder. The world was larger than the familiar, and life was meant to be tested against its mysteries. The horizon was more than a line. It was a boundary between the known and the infinite, a place where imagination could meet reality if one had the courage to go. And so, the restless among the Vikings, those with hearts attuned to possibility, who felt the thrill of uncertainty as acutely as they felt the sting of the cold wind, began to plan. They studied the stars with patient reverence, memorized the courses of rivers and currents, and listened to the sea as one might listen to an old friend. Each voyage became a meditation, a dialogue between human daring and the vast, indifferent natural world. With every passing day, the edge of the known world became less of a distant concept and more of an inevitable destination, calling to those who had the strength to answer. And yet, the unknown was never merely a physical challenge. It was a mirror to the soul, a test of courage, patience, and resolve. The deeper the sea, the more uncertain the sky, the greater the trial of spirit. To leave the familiar behind was to confront both the external world and the inner self, to face fears and doubts that could not be escaped on land. Every ripple in the water, every shadow in the clouds, every cry of a distant bird became a question of readiness. Were they prepared to meet what awaited them, to navigate not only the storms but the uncertainties that lay within? For those who felt the call most strongly, there was no hesitation. To remain at home was safe, yes, but safety was never the measure of greatness. Adventure, discovery, and the chance to touch the edge of the world required action, risk, and belief in what one could accomplish. As night fell, the fjords became quiet, save for the whisper of waves and the occasional call of a distant owl. Fires glowed softly in the villages, and the wind carried the scent of pine, salt, and the sea's eternal mystery. The stars above seemed particularly bright, each one a guide, a promise, or a reminder of the vastness that awaited. And in the hearts of those who dreamed of the horizon, a vision formed. Long ships slicing through silver waters, sails catching the wind, voyagers pressing forward toward what no map could define, toward the edge of the world where the known ended and everything else began. It was a place of danger, yes, but also of wonder, revelation, and the possibility of changing everything. The Vikings did not yet know what awaited them, but the sea itself seemed to acknowledge their longing, its waves rising and falling like the breath of a patient giant. Each journey would test their strength, their courage, and their imagination. Each night, as the wind whispered through the trees and the waves hummed their eternal song, those who listened closely could feel the subtle pull of destiny. The edge of the world was calling, not as a distant legend, but as a tangible future, waiting for those who dared to leave the comfort of home behind and embrace the unknown. And in that quiet, almost sacred anticipation, a story began, one that would ripple across generations, shaping history, inspiring awe, and reminding all who came after that curiosity and courage are the true measure of humanity. The lands the Vikings called home were harsh and demanding, a place where survival required constant effort and resilience. Rugged mountains rose sharply from fjords that cut deep into the earth, their peaks often hidden by clouds that drifted lazily in the sky, giving the impression that the heavens themselves were watching over the land. Thick forests, dark and mysterious, stretched for miles, holding secrets in their shadows and providing both sustenance and danger. In the winters, snow blanketed the valleys, turning familiar paths into treacherous mazes, and the winds howled as if carrying the voices of ancestors warning the living of the perils that awaited the unwary. Life was a constant negotiation with nature, and those who thrived were those who learned to read its signals, respect its power, and adapt with ingenuity. Despite its challenges, Scandinavia was a land of remarkable beauty, where every season brought a new palette of colors and moods. Spring revealed meadows awash with wildflowers, their delicate petals trembling in the cool breeze, and rivers that sparkled like ribbons of silver as the ice melted. Summer brought long, luminous days where the sun seemed reluctant to set, casting golden light across fields, fjords, and forests. Autumn cloaked the land in shades of amber, crimson, and ochre, and the scent of wood smoke from hearth fires mingled with the crispness of the wind. Even winter, with its harsh grip, had a solemn majesty, where frozen lakes reflected the pale sunlight, and the aurora borealis danced across the night sky, leaving the onlooker awestruck and contemplative. Within this formidable yet enchanting environment, communities developed tightly knit bonds. Villages were small, often built of timber and stone, clustered along rivers or sheltered by cliffs. Families relied upon each other not only for survival but for companionship, guidance, and the passing down of wisdom. Elders told stories beside the hearth, and their voices carried lessons that were as practical as they were profound: how to read the sky for approaching storms, how to track animals in the forest, and how to preserve food to survive the bitterest months. These tales also contained warnings of distant lands, of gods and spirits who could aid or hinder, and of adventures beyond the horizon, planting seeds of curiosity and courage in the minds of younger generations. Yet life in these communities was never easy, and the people had to navigate both natural and human challenges. Resources were finite, and the land, though beautiful, demanded respect and careful management. Hunting, fishing, farming, and craftsmanship were daily necessities, each task a delicate balance of skill, timing, and patience. At the same time, intervillage relations could be tense, with disputes over land, trade, or honor sometimes escalating into conflict. Within this context, stories of distant shores and hidden treasures were more than entertainment. They were a form of hope, a reminder that the world contained possibilities beyond immediate hardship, a promise that courage and effort could yield extraordinary rewards. For the Vikings, these pressures and limitations were never reasons to retreat, but rather catalysts for ambition. The harshness of home sharpened their skills and resolve, preparing them for the unknown. They learned to navigate rivers that twisted like serpents through dense forests, to read the winds and waves as a sailor reads a familiar book, and to endure discomfort as a constant companion rather than a complaint. Every hardship at home became a lesson in resilience, an unspoken training ground for exploration and discovery. The familiar struggles made the idea of venturing into uncharted territories seem not reckless but inevitable, a natural extension of a life lived at the edge of endurance. Religion and belief were woven deeply into everyday life, shaping both action and imagination. The gods, Odin, Thor, Freya, and others, were not distant figures but active participants in the world, influencing weather, fate, and fortune. Rituals, offerings, and stories about divine deeds reinforced the idea that life itself was a journey filled with challenges that required wisdom, bravery, and sometimes cunning. When tales of distant lands reached a village, they were often framed in terms of the gods' influence. Was the sea welcoming or treacherous that day because of divine favor or displeasure? Could a new land hold blessings, or would it conceal dangers designed to test mortals' resolve? The interplay of belief, fear, and hope created a mindset in which adventure was not only possible but destined, a calling whispered to those with the ears to hear. The economic pressures of the time also pushed Vikings toward exploration. The homeland offered resources, yes, but not in abundance, and survival sometimes required ingenuity. Trade networks were developing, stretching across rivers, coasts, and even distant lands. Silver, furs, timber, and amber were valuable commodities, and the promise of acquiring more, or finding lands rich in resources yet untouched, fueled ambitions. The Vikings were aware that knowledge of new routes, fertile lands, and hidden treasures could elevate their communities and secure their families' futures. There was an unspoken urgency. Those who dared to seek out the unknown could gain advantage, while those who remained anchored to the familiar risked stagnation and scarcity. Children grew up absorbing both the rhythm of daily life and the allure of stories about the wide world. They watched their elders navigate the forests and seas, imitating their skills and absorbing subtle lessons in observation, patience, and courage. They heard sagas about heroes who had ventured far, faced monstrous beasts, and returned with glory, treasures, or new wisdom. These stories were often embroidered with myth, yet they planted a seed of possibility, a mental image of life beyond the fjords, beyond the forests, beyond the borders of known maps. The contrast between the safety of home and the call of adventure was ever present, creating a tension that shaped their imagination, their dreams, and ultimately, their choices. The lands the Vikings knew were both teacher and challenge, shaping character in ways subtle and profound. Every storm weathered, every river crossed, every animal hunted or tamed, taught lessons of adaptability, observation, and courage. The mountains, forests, and fjords became a canvas for skill and wisdom, a place where physical strength and mental acuity were equally valued. And yet, the same landscapes that demanded so much also whispered promises of more: distant lands, new peoples, and discoveries that could reshape everything the Vikings had ever known. The duality of the familiar and the unknown, the comfort of survival juxtaposed with the thrill of possibility, created a mindset uniquely suited for exploration. By the time a Viking set foot on a longship bound for distant shores, the lessons of home were ingrained, forming a foundation of endurance, ingenuity, and courage. Every hardship endured in their homeland was a preparation for what lay beyond. Every story told by the fire was a spark, igniting curiosity and determination. And every glance toward the horizon carried a mixture of longing and understanding. The world was vast, beautiful and full of danger, but it was also waiting. Waiting for those willing to leave the safety of the known, for those brave enough to embrace the unknown, for those determined enough to let curiosity guide their hands and hearts. The longship was the heart of every Viking voyage, a vessel that embodied both ingenuity and aspiration, a bridge between the known and the unknown. Its sleek lines cut through the water with remarkable grace, as though it were an extension of the sea itself rather than a creation of human hands. Every plank of timber, every joint fastened with iron rivets, spoke of generations of experience and craft, honed through centuries of trial and error. The longship was more than a tool for transportation. It was a symbol of freedom, a means of connection between distant lands, and a vessel that carried the dreams of those who dared to leave home in search of what lay beyond the horizon. Crafted primarily from oak, the ships were light enough to be carried across land, yet sturdy enough to survive storms that would have shattered ordinary vessels. The keel, carefully curved, allowed the longship to glide smoothly over waves, responding to the slightest shift of wind and current. Its shallow draft enabled navigation through rivers, inlets, and coastal waters that would have been impassable to larger ships, opening paths that others could not traverse. These design features were not accidental. They reflected a deep understanding of the sea, honed by centuries of observation, experience, and adaptation. The longship was a testament to Viking intelligence and their ability to marry practicality with artistry. The bow and stern of the longship often rose high above the water, decorated with carved figures that could be dragons, serpents, or other mythological creatures. These embellishments were more than aesthetic. They were intended to protect, to intimidate, and to embody the spirit of the voyage itself. Sailors believed that the carvings could ward off evil spirits, guide the ship safely, or announce their presence to distant lands in a way that commanded respect. Each vessel carried its own personality, a combination of craftsmanship, symbolism, and purpose, reflecting the culture and beliefs of the people who built and sailed it. The ship was a living extension of the crew's courage, a partner in both triumph and adversity. The crew itself was carefully chosen and trained, a group whose rhythm and coordination could mean the difference between survival and disaster. Rowing in unison was both art and necessity, a movement that required strength, endurance, and trust. Each oar stroke became part of a larger harmony, echoing the heartbeat of the vessel and the pulse of the sea. Sailors learned to read subtle cues in the waves, to sense changes in wind and tide, and to anticipate the moods of the water as if it were a sentient companion. The ship was a reflection of human cooperation, skill, and adaptability, and every journey demanded complete synchronization of body, mind, and environment. The sails, usually made of woven wool, caught the wind like the wings of a bird, propelling the ship across vast distances with astonishing efficiency. Adjusting the sail required intuition as much as technique, a balance of patience and decisiveness. The wind was at once a partner and a challenge, capable of carrying the ship swiftly toward new horizons or throwing it into chaos with sudden storms. Each voyage required respect for this duality, an understanding that while the ship could carry them, the sea ultimately determined the terms of the journey. This dynamic relationship fostered a quiet reverence for nature and a sense of humility even amidst the thrill of exploration. The sensation of standing on the deck of a longship, feeling the subtle sway of the hull beneath one's feet, is difficult to convey fully, yet it shaped the very character of the Vikings who sailed them. The spray of salt water, the wind tearing at hair and clothing, and the endless horizon stretching in every direction created a profound sense of smallness and awe. Every voyage was a meditation on human limitations and potential, a test of courage, endurance, and resolve. It was on these ships that the Vikings confronted both the external challenges of the sea and the internal landscapes of fear, ambition, and wonder. The longship was not merely a means of travel, it was a vessel for transformation, carrying those aboard toward experiences that would redefine their understanding of the world. The design of the longship also allowed for incredible versatility. It could be launched from the sea to raid distant shores, transported overland to surprise enemies or access hidden rivers, and adapted for both warfare and trade. Its speed and maneuverability were legendary, often giving Vikings a strategic advantage over larger, slower vessels. Yet even with all its advantages, the longship required vigilance, knowledge, and skill. Each journey demanded careful preparation, the distribution of cargo and crew, the inspection of sails and hull, and the calculation of routes based on both geography and seasonal conditions. These tasks reinforced discipline, foresight, and a sense of responsibility among the crew, qualities essential for survival in unfamiliar and often hostile territories. Beyond the practical, the longship carried symbolic weight. It represented ambition, courage, and the promise of discovery. To climb aboard a ship ready for the open sea was to step into a world of possibility, leaving behind the security of the known for the uncertainty of what lay ahead. The vessel itself became a narrative device, a stage for human drama, where bonds of camaraderie were forged, fears were confronted, and triumphs celebrated. In many ways, the longship was a storyteller, chronicling the journeys, successes, and failures of those who trusted it to carry them to the edge of the world. At night, when the sailors rested, the ship became a sanctuary and a lens through which to perceive the infinite. The gentle rocking lulled them into contemplation, the stars above mirrored the endless paths they might follow, and the sounds of the sea provided a constant, soothing rhythm. Every creak of the timbers and splash of waves reminded them of the delicate balance between human effort and natural forces. The longship was a teacher of patience, endurance, and humility, shaping not only the trajectory of their voyage but the very mindset of those aboard. It was here, amidst the interplay of wind, water, and wood, that the Vikings learned to navigate both the physical and emotional challenges of the unknown. Stories of these ships traveled back to the villages and fjords, inspiring awe and aspiration among those who had yet to embark on a journey. The longship became an icon of possibility, a tangible representation of the human drive to explore, to conquer, and to understand. It was celebrated in song and saga, immortalized in carvings and tales, and revered for the opportunities it made possible. Each vessel carried the weight of tradition and innovation, a testament to the union of craftsmanship, courage, and imagination. The longship was, in essence, a microcosm of the Viking spirit, elegant in design, resilient in adversity, and capable of bridging worlds. It transformed the vast, indifferent sea into a navigable expanse, turning the terrifying unknown into a canvas for human aspiration. The Vikings ventured into a world that was as much imagined as it was real, guided by tools, intuition, and stories passed down through generations. Maps, when they existed, were rudimentary, often sketched on animal skins or carved into wood, but their value lay less in precision and more in guidance, hinting at possibilities rather than dictating exact routes. Knowledge was carried in the mind as much as on parchment. Landmarks, river courses, the shifting of tides, the flight of birds, and the patterns of clouds all became part of a vast mental map that allowed sailors to navigate seas that seemed endless. The horizon was both a literal boundary and a canvas upon which imagination painted distant lands. Among the most fascinating and enigmatic tools of navigation was the sunstone, a crystal said to reveal the sun's location even when clouds obscured it. By rotating the stone and observing how light polarized within it, a skilled navigator could determine direction, maintaining course across vast, featureless waters. This practice was not merely technical, it required patience, intuition, and a deep understanding of the interplay between natural phenomena and human perception. The sunstone represented a merging of observation and wonder, a symbol of human ingenuity standing against the uncertainty of the unknown. Stars, too, were faithful guides. The night sky, clear and luminous, became a tapestry of instruction. Constellations were memorized and used to estimate latitude, a practice requiring calm attention and careful observation. The sailors learned to read the subtle differences in starlight, the timing of their rise and set, and the angles that hinted at direction. Every glance upward was a lesson in both geography and patience, a quiet ritual that connected the human observer to the vastness of the cosmos. The stars were companions on lonely nights, silent witnesses to courage, fear, and determination. Beyond tools, the Vikings relied on storytelling to navigate both the literal and figurative seas. Oral tradition preserved knowledge of dangerous waters, shifting currents, and hidden reefs, encoded within sagas that combined fact and myth. Tales of sea serpents, whirlpools, and phantom lands were more than entertainment. They served as mnemonic devices, guiding sailors through perils while instilling caution and respect. Every story, carefully retold, carried subtle lessons in geography, weather patterns, and human behavior, blending imagination with practical knowledge. To navigate successfully was to understand both the world as it was and the world as it might be imagined. The ocean itself demanded constant attention. Its moods were unpredictable, capable of transforming from calm serenity to violent fury in moments. Observing waves, wind, and the behavior of birds or fish became second nature. An experienced sailor could sense a storm approaching long before it arrived, interpreting subtle changes in the water's texture, the scent of the air, and the movement of clouds. The sea communicated in signs that only those attuned to it could perceive. Reading these signs required not only skill but also mindfulness and patience, qualities that were cultivated through both practice and reverence. Yet navigation was not purely mechanical or intellectual, it was deeply psychological. The unknown created both excitement and fear, and sailors had to master their emotions as much as their instruments. The vastness of the sea could induce a sense of vertigo, a feeling of being lost in infinity, where familiar landmarks disappeared and the horizon seemed unending. Courage became a discipline, honed through experience and reinforced by communal effort. Crew members depended on one another, relying on shared knowledge, mutual trust, and coordinated action. In this way, navigation was both an individual and collective skill, intertwining human resilience with environmental observation. Stories of lands beyond the horizon were both inspiration and instruction. Tales told by skalds and elders described cliffs that rose like walls, rivers that glowed with strange colors, and forests inhabited by creatures that were half real, half imagined. These narratives carried warnings as well as promise, teaching the importance of caution, respect, and flexibility. A sailor who approached the unknown with arrogance or ignorance was unlikely to survive, while those who combined bravery with attentiveness found not only safety but also opportunity. Myth and reality were intertwined, creating a cognitive map that guided both imagination and action. The interplay between technology and intuition became particularly evident when storms arose. The sunstone could be useless beneath a thundercloud, and stars hidden behind darkness, leaving sailors to rely entirely on memory, experience, and instinct. The ship became an extension of perception, responding to subtle shifts in waves and wind, guided by hands that had internalized years of knowledge. In these moments, navigation became a deeply embodied practice, a dance between human skill and natural forces. Every decision carried weight, every observation mattered, and the stakes were high. A single miscalculation could lead to disaster. Yet even in danger, there was wonder. The ocean was a living entity, filled with creatures, colors, and phenomena that inspired awe. Bioluminescent waves shimmered under moonlight, whales breached with majestic power, and the aurora borealis danced across polar skies, creating moments of quiet, surreal beauty. These experiences were recorded mentally and orally, forming a library of sensory impressions that guided future voyages. Each sighting, each subtle shift in the environment, became a story, a lesson, and a guide, reinforcing the notion that understanding the unknown required both observation and imagination. The Vikings' approach to navigation reflected a balance between structure and freedom, between measured knowledge and daring exploration. Mental maps were complemented by sensory experience, oral tradition, and intuition. Their voyages were not aimless drifting but deliberate acts of engagement with a world that demanded respect, patience, and curiosity. Every journey was a negotiation with uncertainty, a dialogue between human ingenuity and the vastness of the natural world. To navigate successfully was to cultivate awareness, adaptability, and a sense of wonder, all while maintaining the focus and discipline required for survival. This blend of myth, observation, and technical skill exemplified the Vikings' ability to approach the unknown with both humility and courage. They understood that the world was larger than their immediate surroundings, and they approached it with a combination of reverence, ingenuity, and curiosity. Each voyage beyond familiar shores was a lesson in perception, psychology, and strategy, a practice that demanded attention to detail as well as openness to possibility. The edge of the world was not simply a physical location. It was a conceptual frontier, a space where human imagination and skill intersected with nature's infinite complexity. In quiet moments, as the longship cut silently through calm waters under starlit skies, the sailors felt the profound connection between their craft, their stories, and the vast unknown. They were both observers and participants, recording lessons in memory and legend, attuning themselves to signs that might save or guide them. The moment of departure was a mixture of exhilaration and tension, a threshold that separated the comfort of home from the uncertainty of the open sea. Villages faded behind them as longships glided over calm waters, their oars dipping rhythmically into the waves, each stroke a step further into the unknown. The wind carried both the scent of pine from the fjords and the briny tang of the sea, a reminder that the familiar was receding and the extraordinary lay ahead. The horizon stretched endlessly, a subtle line that teased the imagination and ignited curiosity, as if the world itself were challenging the sailors to see how far they could go. The initial hours of a voyage carried a deceptive calm. The waves, gentle and inviting, lulled the sailors into a rhythm that felt almost meditative, the sun reflecting on the water in sparkling patterns that mesmerized the eyes. Yet beneath this serenity lay an awareness that the sea was never truly still, that danger could arrive suddenly, without warning, and that each mile traveled carried risk and possibility in equal measure. This duality, tranquility and threat, beauty and peril, created a heightened state of presence, where every sound, shift in the wind, and subtle change in current demanded attention. The journey was not merely physical, it was a test of awareness, courage, and adaptability. As the hours turned into days, the sailors' senses became attuned to the subtle language of the ocean. Waves spoke in rhythms, the wind whispered directions, and birds circling above hinted at the presence of land. Each observation was both practical and poetic, a lesson in the interplay between environment and human perception. Navigators noted the color of the water, the temperature of the air, and the patterns of clouds, interpreting them as signs of weather, currents, or nearby shores. Knowledge became instinct, and instinct became trust, in themselves, in each other, and in the ship that carried them forward. Storms were inevitable, and when they arrived, the calm of the sea transformed into raw, elemental power. Waves towered like moving mountains, their crests frothing and curling with menace, and winds howled with a voice that seemed almost alive. Lightning split the sky, illuminating the expanse of ocean in stark, fleeting brilliance, while thunder rolled like the growl of some distant beast. In these moments, the longship, nimble and resilient, became both refuge and test. Each decision mattered: how to angle the sail, when to row in unison, when to trust the currents, and the crew's coordination determined survival. Fear was present, but so was focus. The storm demanded every ounce of attention, every measure of skill. The psychological aspect of such a voyage was profound. Isolation stretched beyond the physical to the mental, as endless waters reflected the vastness of possibility and the smallness of human endeavor. Sailors confronted their own fears, doubts, and uncertainties, learning to master emotions that might otherwise undermine judgment. Each day, each night, offered lessons in resilience, patience in the face of monotony, courage in the presence of danger, and hope in the midst of uncertainty. These were journeys not only across the sea but into the depths of human experience, where every challenge sharpened the mind and strengthened the spirit. Food and sustenance were constant concerns, shaping both routine and mood. Dried fish, salted meat, and hard bread became staples, supplemented by the occasional catch from nets cast into the water. Fresh water, carefully rationed, was as precious as gold, and sailors learned to recognize natural indicators of safe drinking sources or rain collection. Meals were simple but vital, moments of shared respite and reflection. These modest provisions contrasted sharply with the grandeur of the surrounding seascape, highlighting the tension between human fragility and the power of nature. Each day of sustenance became a quiet triumph, a testament to planning, discipline, and cooperation. The emotional texture of the voyage was layered with awe, anticipation, and camaraderie. Conversations often meandered into stories of gods, heroes, and legendary explorers, their words weaving a tapestry that connected the past to the present. Laughter punctuated tension, songs carried across the waves, and moments of silence allowed for reflection on the enormity of the journey. Each sailor was both participant and witness, experiencing danger and beauty with acute awareness. The shared rhythm of rowing, the adjustments of the sail, the observation of the stars, all fostered a profound sense of unity, a realization that survival and success depended on mutual trust and collective skill. As days merged into nights, the horizon remained a tantalizing mystery. Occasionally, shapes emerged, distant birds, unusual cloud formations, or the subtle dark line of land barely visible. Each hint of possibility sparked discussion, speculation, and excitement, yet the uncertainty remained. The sailors learned patience, recognizing that discovery was measured not in hours but in the slow accumulation of clues, observations, and calculated risk. They were explorers not only of geography but of perception, learning to read the environment with both care and imagination, interpreting signs that might guide them safely toward their goal. Sleep on the longship was intermittent and light, a cycle punctuated by the motion of waves and the needs of the crew. Yet in those brief moments of rest, the mind continued to process the world around it, the distant glow of bioluminescent water, the subtle changes in wind, and the faint silhouette of cloud or land. Dreams intertwined with reality, creating a mental map enriched by both experience and imagination. Even in exhaustion, sailors remained attuned to the sea, their subconscious constantly parsing information, anticipating danger, and planning for what lay ahead. This blending of conscious and unconscious awareness became a hallmark of successful voyaging. The first sightings of truly foreign waters, of currents and coastlines unlike those of home, were moments of both triumph and trepidation. The unfamiliar presented a challenge to both skill and expectation, forcing adaptation and careful observation. Each new element, the texture of the sand beneath shallow water, the shapes of cliffs, or the flight of birds, was catalogued mentally, providing clues for navigation and survival. The contrast between known and unknown created heightened sensitivity, a sense that every detail mattered, that every observation could be the key to success or the difference between life and disaster. Throughout the voyage, the Vikings maintained a delicate balance between hope and caution. Excitement for discovery coexisted with respect for danger, curiosity intertwined with vigilance. The edge of the known world was not a single point but a continuum of experiences, each step forward a negotiation with both the environment and the human mind. With each passing day, the distance from home grew, the horizon expanded, and the sense of being on the verge of something monumental intensified. Every wave crossed, every night endured, every decision made, brought them closer to lands that would challenge, inspire, and ultimately transform everything they had known. And so, the journey continued, a measured advance into uncertainty, a dance between skill and instinct, observation and imagination. The moment the first glimpses of land appeared on the horizon, a quiet awe swept through the crew. It was not a dramatic revelation, but rather a subtle shift in perception, a dark line against the pale sky, a faint green hue hinting at trees, a ripple in the water signaling shallows or rocks. After weeks on endless sea, the familiar rhythms of waves, wind, and sail had been replaced by a new tension, a mixture of excitement and careful calculation. Sailors instinctively scanned for safe approaches, for hidden dangers, and for signs of habitation or resources. The unknown had become tangible, yet it retained its air of mystery, a promise that the world beyond was both real and yet still waiting to be understood. The approach to land required acute observation and patience. The shallow waters around the coast demanded careful navigation, each movement of the longship deliberate and measured. Rocks hidden beneath the waves could tear the hull, and unseen currents could push the vessel dangerously close to jagged cliffs. The crew worked in synchronized effort, oars dipping with precision, eyes scanning the horizon, hands adjusting ropes and sails as needed. Every detail mattered, and the ship itself seemed to respond to the attentiveness of those aboard, gliding smoothly over calm shallows while allowing careful maneuvering around potential hazards. The first encounter with new land was a dance of skill, observation, and respect. The air itself carried signs of life. The scent of vegetation, subtly different from the familiar forests of home, hinted at new flora and possibly fertile grounds. Birds circled overhead, their flight patterns signaling possible freshwater or safe landing points. Even the water near the shore differed, clearer in some places, darker in others, indicating depth or hidden rocks. The Vikings had learned to interpret such subtle cues, each one a piece of a larger puzzle that could determine the safety of landing and the success of the expedition. Observation was more than practical. It was a form of communion with the environment, a dialogue between humans and the natural world. Landing on foreign soil brought both exhilaration and caution. Stepping onto unknown beaches, the crew felt the texture of sand and rock beneath their feet, noted the growth of trees and plants, and listened for the distant sounds of animals. Every detail mattered: edible plants, fresh water, shelter, and potential threats. This first contact with land beyond home was a sensory experience, heightened by the contrast with the monotonous expanse of the sea. Every sound, scent, and visual detail became part of a mental map, a record for navigation, exploration, and survival. The edge of the known world was no longer abstract. It was tangible, textured, and alive. Exploration of these lands required a careful balance of curiosity and caution. The Vikings moved slowly, aware that every step could reveal both opportunity and danger. They observed tracks in the soil, listened for movement in forests, and tested the water for currents or temperature. Small observations accumulated into larger patterns, allowing the crew to form impressions of the landscape, its resources, and potential hazards. This methodical approach ensured that discovery was deliberate, measured, and sustainable rather than reckless. The first footsteps on new soil were not merely physical, they were acts of cognition, perception, and engagement with the unknown. Interaction with unfamiliar ecosystems revealed both marvels and challenges. Birds of unexpected colors, fish previously unseen, and trees with strange bark all expanded the crew's understanding of the world. Yet alongside wonder came caution. Unfamiliar plants could be poisonous, currents could be treacherous, and hidden predators might lurk in forests or waters. Every observation required judgment, a blend of knowledge from home, intuition, and attentive study of immediate surroundings. The environment was simultaneously welcoming and demanding, offering sustenance and shelter while reminding explorers that they were outsiders in a new, untamed world. Psychologically, stepping onto unknown land transformed the journey. The endless sea had demanded vigilance, skill, and patience, but the land introduced new layers of perception and decision-making. Each step required assessment, each moment an opportunity to learn or err. The mind, sharpened by weeks of navigation, now faced new variables: soil quality, freshwater sources, vegetation types, and potential interactions with other life forms. The thrill of discovery was intertwined with responsibility, as the crew understood that their actions could impact survival and future navigation. Curiosity was tempered by caution, and awe existed alongside practical necessity. The interplay between observation and imagination intensified on land. Stories told of distant realms now took on a tangible dimension, merging memory with sensory experience. Forests whispered secrets similar to those described in sagas, rivers reflected sunlight in ways that evoked tales of magic or providence, and the changing weather seemed to echo the myths carried from home. Sailors and explorers experienced a profound connection between inherited stories and immediate reality, a melding that enhanced both understanding and wonder. The mental maps constructed over weeks of sailing now found anchors in the physical world, creating a sense of discovery that was both intellectual and emotional. The first nights on land were moments of quiet reflection. Campfires were lit carefully, smoke rising in spirals that seemed almost ritualistic, the warmth providing comfort after weeks of cold and salt. Conversations were subdued, reflecting on the day's discoveries, speculating about further exploration, and sharing observations that might guide future expeditions. Sleep was lighter than on the sea, each sound from the surrounding environment a prompt for vigilance or curiosity. Yet even in this quiet, the psychological shift was profound. The crew now inhabited a space that had previously existed only in imagination or hearsay, bridging the gap between myth and reality. Encounters with flora and fauna introduced practical and strategic challenges. Identifying edible plants, safe water sources, and materials suitable for shelter required observation, experimentation, and sometimes cautious risk. Animals, both small and large, could be either sustenance or threat. Understanding the behavior of these creatures demanded patience, attentiveness, and adaptability. Every interaction was an extension of the skills honed on the sea: observation, judgment, and careful engagement with the environment. Land, like the ocean, became a teacher, providing lessons in survival, resourcefulness, and respect. The contrast between land and sea was stark. The ocean had been dynamic, unpredictable, and boundless, while the land introduced texture, stability, and a new set of variables. This shift required cognitive flexibility, the ability to apply knowledge acquired in one domain to another, and the capacity to observe and interpret novel patterns. Exploration was no longer about linear navigation alone. It now included scouting, mapping, and strategic assessment. The arrival on new shores was a profound shift for the Vikings, a transition from the fluidity of the sea to the tangible presence of land. Each step taken across the unfamiliar soil brought with it new textures, sounds, and scents. The sand, smooth yet uneven, shifted beneath their feet in a way that was at once grounding and unfamiliar. Pebbles clinked softly under boots and bare feet, the subtle noises reminding the sailors that every movement mattered. The air carried a mixture of salt, earth, and greenery, a fragrant combination that suggested both fertility and mystery. Every breath taken was a reminder that this world was alive, full of possibilities and hidden dangers alike. The first explorations required meticulous attention. Crews would fan out slowly, surveying terrain, noting the density of forests, the presence of freshwater streams, and the shapes of hills and cliffs. Every observation was catalogued mentally, forming an evolving map that could guide further movements. The contrast with the vast openness of the sea was striking. On land, space was defined, limited, yet filled with complexity. Each grove of trees or undulating hill became both a marker and a challenge, a puzzle that demanded understanding, respect, and cautious curiosity. The edge of the known world now existed in 3 dimensions, requiring vigilance, discernment, and adaptability. The environment was rich in signs of life. Birds with unfamiliar calls darted between branches, insects buzzed through the undergrowth, and the subtle rustle of larger creatures suggested the presence of mammals, either predator or prey. Observing these animals became both a matter of strategy and wonder. Birds flying inland suggested fresh water or safe landing areas, while signs of larger animals indicated hunting possibilities but also potential threats. The Vikings relied on centuries of observational knowledge, combining instinct with inherited wisdom to navigate this new ecosystem. Every sound, movement, or scent was a clue, contributing to a complex understanding of the land's character. Plant life offered both sustenance and learning. Trees with distinctive bark, leaves, and fruit were studied carefully, as were grasses, shrubs, and flowering plants. Some were edible, providing nutrition for the travelers. Others could be used for shelter, fire, or tools. The need to understand the environment fostered a deep sense of observation, patience, and experimentation. The Vikings approached these discoveries systematically, testing cautiously, noting differences, and sharing findings with their companions. Every interaction with the flora was simultaneously practical and educational, blending survival with curiosity and respect. Settling temporarily on unfamiliar land required more than physical presence. It required strategy. Shelter had to be constructed in locations that provided both safety and resources, often close to water yet protected from wind and potential predators. Fires were built carefully, balancing warmth, cooking needs, and the need to remain unobtrusive. Tents, tarps, and makeshift structures provided temporary refuge, yet the environment itself offered clues about where and how to establish these spaces. Observation, attention to detail, and planning became essential, reinforcing the Vikings' ability to adapt to the unknown with both skill and foresight. The psychological impact of landfall was significant. For weeks, the crew had been immersed in the endless horizon of the sea, dependent on rhythm, observation, and coordination. The land, in contrast, offered complexity and depth. It demanded new skills, spatial reasoning, ecological understanding, and careful management of resources. The transition from one environment to another challenged perceptions, forcing the Vikings to integrate experience from the sea with the novel demands of terrain. This cognitive flexibility became essential, highlighting the interplay between preparation, adaptation, and curiosity. The edge of the world was not merely a geographic point, it was a mental frontier as well. Interaction with the environment also carried an emotional resonance. Each discovery, the glint of a freshwater stream, the delicate scent of a flowering plant, the sudden flash of a bird in flight, evoked wonder. Simultaneously, awareness of risk remained present. Hidden rocks, uneven ground, and the possibility of predatory animals created a constant undercurrent of vigilance. These dualities, beauty and danger, familiarity and strangeness, heightened perception, deepened engagement, and strengthened the crew's connection with the land. The edge of the world was now a living, breathing entity, demanding both admiration and respect. Observation extended to the water as well. Coastal tides, waves, and currents provided insight into safe anchorage and potential hazards. Subtle changes in water color indicated sandbanks, rocks, or depth variations, while patterns in ripples suggested underwater obstacles. The Vikings had learned to read these signs at sea, but on land, observation became more nuanced, incorporating sound, smell, and tactile feedback from the shoreline. The interaction between land and water was a continuous lesson in the interconnectedness of natural forces, reinforcing the Vikings' understanding that mastery of the environment required integrated attention to multiple cues. Exploration revealed both challenges and resources. Rocky terrain offered materials for tools and construction, while sandy soils suggested fertile areas for potential cultivation or temporary sustenance. The environment itself dictated patterns of movement, requiring adaptation and careful planning. Paths were chosen based on ease of travel, availability of fresh water, and shelter from elements, blending instinct with observation. Each decision reinforced skills of strategy, foresight, and responsiveness to dynamic conditions. Landfall was not simply arrival, it was an immersive process of negotiation with an environment that was both generous and demanding. The first nights on land deepened sensory perception. Campfires crackled softly, the scent of smoke mingling with vegetation, while stars above provided continuity with the celestial guidance relied upon at sea. Sounds of nocturnal animals punctuated silence, reinforcing awareness of surroundings. Sleep was both restorative and vigilant, an interplay between relaxation and subtle alertness. The contrast with ocean-bound sleep, motionless but surrounded by water, was profound, illustrating the shift from one domain to another while maintaining continuity in observation and adaptation. The edge of the world demanded both physical presence and cognitive engagement, creating a holistic experience that shaped perception, decision-making, and emotional resilience. Interactions among the crew took on new dimensions. Shared observation, collective decision-making, and the exchange of insights about land features reinforced teamwork. Discussions about potential resources, hazards, and paths forward strengthened bonds and enhanced the collective understanding of the environment. The transition from sea to land required recalibration of roles and responsibilities, and each member's expertise became more visible and critical. The days following the initial landfall were a delicate balance between exploration and consolidation. The Vikings moved deliberately, learning to interpret the terrain, noting changes in vegetation, the contours of hills, and the presence of water sources. Every stream, grove, or rocky outcrop became a point of reference, helping them understand the environment and build a mental map that extended beyond immediate observation. Walking across new soil required attention to detail. Subtle shifts in elevation could conceal hidden pools or jagged stones, while the movement of plants or insects hinted at resources or potential threats. Each step was measured, each glance deliberate, combining curiosity with prudence. The air was filled with unfamiliar scents and sounds, which heightened both awareness and imagination. Birds sang in melodies unfamiliar yet melodious, rustling in trees that were alien in form yet beautiful in their variation. Insects buzzed along undergrowth and meadows, sometimes brightly colored, sometimes nearly invisible, offering subtle clues about the health and diversity of the ecosystem. The ground was alive with small movements, scurrying mammals, the glimmer of scales from fish in streams, or the flicker of shadows from larger creatures. Every observation contributed to understanding the balance of life on the land, and with each detail, the Vikings refined their ability to predict, respond, and interact effectively with the environment. Food and sustenance remained central concerns. Edible plants were tested carefully, guided by experience and knowledge inherited from home, while foraging near freshwater sources required caution and attentiveness. Streams were inspected for clarity, flow, and the presence of fish, while foraging paths were noted for future reference. Gathering required both strategy and patience, an awareness of what was immediately necessary and what might be needed in the days ahead. The land, generous and complex, offered nourishment but also demanded respect and caution, reinforcing the Vikings' dual approach of curiosity tempered by prudence. Water, critical for survival, was scrutinized with care. Freshwater streams were tested for taste, clarity, and flow, providing immediate sustenance while signaling potential landing areas for larger exploration. Observation extended to tidal behavior and wave patterns near shorelines, as these subtle cues often suggested the contours of the underwater terrain. The Vikings combined sensory input with prior knowledge, interpreting minute differences in color, sound, and temperature to make informed decisions about where to drink, camp, or navigate. The skill of reading water was a continuation of their sea-bound expertise, now applied with nuanced precision to a terrestrial environment. Exploration of the landscape revealed both practical resources and signs of mystery. Trees provided timber for repair, shelter, and tools, while rocks could be shaped into implements or markers for navigation. Unfamiliar plant species were cataloged, some potentially useful, others dangerous, requiring careful identification. The ecosystem seemed layered and intricate, each element connected to the others in subtle ways. Observing how animals moved, where water pooled, and how plants grew offered insights into seasonal patterns, feeding habits, and environmental hazards. Every discovery contributed to a cumulative understanding that would serve not only the current crew but generations to come. The psychological dimension of the landfall was profound. Moving from the endless expanse of the ocean to defined spaces of terrain introduced new challenges for perception, planning, and adaptation. The crew's mental map expanded rapidly, integrating sensory experiences with inherited knowledge and creative inference. Each observation reinforced confidence, while each unexpected element demanded flexibility and problem-solving. The edge of the world became a layered concept, encompassing both physical space and the cognitive effort required to navigate, understand, and thrive within it. Success depended as much on mental acuity and emotional resilience as on physical skill. Nighttime brought new subtleties to exploration. Campfires flickered against the darkness, their glow illuminating small areas while leaving much of the landscape shrouded in shadow. Sounds shifted, nocturnal animals stirred, wind whispered through trees, and water lapped gently against shores or rocky edges. Sleep was light and interrupted by alertness, each sound prompting evaluation. Yet this heightened awareness coexisted with moments of quiet reflection, allowing the crew to integrate observations from the day. The darkness itself became an instructive teacher, revealing patterns, contrasts, and nuances invisible in daylight. Interactions among the crew continued to play a central role in adaptation. Shared observations, discussions about potential hazards, and coordination of tasks reinforced both social cohesion and practical efficiency. Each member's expertise contributed to collective knowledge, whether in recognizing edible plants, assessing water safety, or interpreting signs of wildlife. Mutual trust and attention ensured that decisions were informed and responsive to immediate realities. Exploration was thus a social as well as a cognitive endeavor, where survival and discovery relied on communication, observation, and collaboration. The interplay between imagination and reality remained constant. Stories of distant lands from home informed expectations and influenced perceptions, yet first-hand observation often challenged or refined these narratives. Trees, rivers, and animals were experienced directly, revealing subtleties that oral tradition could only hint at. Sailors found themselves mapping the unknown both mentally and emotionally, negotiating between inherited tales and lived experience. The result was a deeper, richer understanding, where myth and reality coexisted, shaping both perception and interpretation of the environment. The land offered both immediate lessons and longer-term insights. Patterns in plant growth indicated seasonal cycles and soil quality, while animal behavior suggested potential hunting strategies or areas to avoid. Rocks and terrain features guided the construction of shelters, pathways, and observation points. Freshwater sources influenced campsite selection, while wind direction and elevation informed exposure to weather. Each decision relied on careful synthesis of sensory input, prior knowledge, and adaptive reasoning. Exploration became a continuous process of evaluation and recalibration, with the land itself as both instructor and challenge. As the days progressed, a rhythm emerged. Exploration, observation, and consolidation alternated with periods of rest and reflection. Crew members adapted to new environmental cues, refining their skills in foraging, navigation, and survival. Confidence grew alongside awareness of risk, creating a delicate balance between boldness and caution. The edge of the world became increasingly defined, not as a line or a point, but as a continuum of space, experience, and discovery, each segment unfolding as the Vikings moved deeper into unfamiliar terrain. Every encounter, from minor observations to significant discoveries, reinforced the importance of attentiveness and patience. The following days on the distant shores unfolded as a careful balance of observation, adaptation, and quiet exploration. Every morning brought a new light to the landscape, revealing textures, colors, and details previously unseen. Dew glistened on the grass and leaves, reflecting sunlight in delicate, shifting patterns that changed with each passing hour. The gentle rustle of foliage in the wind, the distant call of birds, and the occasional splash of fish in shallow streams created a symphony of subtle sounds that both guided and grounded the Vikings. Every sensory input became an essential piece of information, shaping perception and influencing decisions about movement, foraging, and the establishment of temporary camps. Walking through unfamiliar terrain required a heightened sense of attentiveness. Pebbles and uneven ground demanded careful placement of each foot, while slopes and hidden dips could conceal streams, rocks, or other features that required navigation with skill. The air carried scents that signaled both opportunity and caution. The earthy fragrance of wet soil suggested fertile areas for plants, while the sharp tang of certain herbs or distant smoke hinted at either potential sustenance or unknown danger. Every breath, every glance, every sound contributed to the evolving understanding of the land. The Vikings moved with deliberate calm, balancing curiosity with caution, and learning to read the environment as both guide and teacher. Foraging and food collection became exercises in careful observation and cautious experimentation. Leaves, fruits, and roots were examined, touched, and, when deemed safe, tasted with meticulous attention. Streams were checked for clarity, flow, and signs of fish, while edges of forests or meadows were assessed for edible plants or small game. Each interaction required patience and discernment, combining inherited knowledge with instinct and direct experience. The land provided sustenance, but it demanded respect and mindfulness. Every discovery, however small, reinforced the Vikings' ability to survive, adapt, and thrive in unfamiliar territory. The psychology of exploration was as critical as the physical challenges. The mind, sharpened by weeks of open sea, now confronted a new set of variables: terrain, flora, fauna, and potential hazards. Each step demanded observation, interpretation, and reflection. The crew developed routines that incorporated both attentiveness and relaxation, balancing vigilance with moments of quiet rest. Shadows, patterns, and distant movements were constantly scanned and interpreted, Yet the Vikings also allowed themselves to appreciate the beauty and novelty of their surroundings. This dual awareness, practical and aesthetic, enhanced perception, sustained morale, and reinforced the cognitive flexibility necessary for continued discovery. Navigating the interplay of land and water became a central task. Streams, ponds, and small lakes were sources of sustenance but also potential hazards. Subtle differences in water color, flow patterns, or the movement of aquatic creatures provided critical information. The Vikings had learned to read water at sea, and these skills were now applied with refined precision to terrestrial environments. Understanding how land and water interacted, observing tidal effects on coastal features, and noting seasonal or environmental patterns became essential elements of both survival and exploration. Water was both resource and guide, shaping movement, decision-making, and perception of the broader landscape. The crew also became increasingly aware of signs of animal activity. Tracks in the soil indicated movement patterns and potential feeding areas, while sounds of birds, insects, and mammals revealed the rhythms of life in the new territory. Some encounters were fleeting, a glimpse of a fox darting through undergrowth, a sudden splash in a stream, but each observation contributed to a growing mental map of the environment. Understanding these signs allowed the Vikings to anticipate conditions, locate resources, and avoid hazards. The edge of the world was alive with information, demanding attentiveness, interpretation, and respect. Building temporary shelters was both a practical necessity and an exercise in adaptation. The Vikings used local materials, timber, leaves, stones, and clay, to create spaces that offered protection from the elements. Sites were chosen carefully, often near water but shielded from wind and potential predators. Construction required skill, planning, and teamwork, transforming raw materials into functional, safe, and sometimes even comfortable shelters. The process reinforced cohesion among the crew and provided a tangible sense of accomplishment, transforming the unfamiliar land into a space of both safety and discovery. The contrast between the sea and land became increasingly apparent. The ocean had demanded constant vigilance and rhythm, while the land introduced complexity, stability, and variability. Moving across solid ground required attention to both immediate and distant features, integrating knowledge of topography, resources, and potential threats. The Vikings learned to navigate in 3 dimensions, observing subtle cues in vegetation, slope, and water patterns. Each day became a careful dance of observation, testing, and adaptation, blending inherited knowledge with new experience to create a sophisticated understanding of the territory. Interaction with the environment was not purely practical, it carried an emotional resonance as well. The sight of flowing streams, the smell of fertile soil, and the sound of wildlife created a profound sense of connection to the land. At the same time, awareness of potential dangers maintained a quiet vigilance. This duality, wonder and caution, heightened perception, deepened engagement, and reinforced respect for the complexity of the world beyond home. The edge of the known world was both a space to be explored and a teacher demanding humility, observation, and care. The Vikings' collective experience on land strengthened social bonds. Shared discoveries, joint decision-making, and collaborative problem-solving reinforced cohesion, trust, and communication. Crew members relied on each other's skills, knowledge, and insights to navigate unfamiliar terrain, test food, identify water sources, and construct shelters. The social dynamics became integral to both survival and the process of discovery. Mutual observation, discussion, and reflection enhanced not only practical effectiveness but also cognitive and emotional resilience, creating a group capable of navigating uncertainty with confidence and cooperation. As exploration continued, the Vikings refined their ability to integrate observation, reflection, and action. Every detail, soil color, plant type, animal movement, water flow, was noted and interpreted. Patterns emerged, revealing both resources and risks, guiding the next steps of exploration and settlement. The land provided continuous feedback, teaching lessons about adaptability, foresight, and the interconnectedness of natural systems. Observation became an almost meditative practice, where attention to detail, patience, and reflection allowed the crew to navigate uncertainty with both skill and composure. Over time, small patterns and routines became established. Paths were traced to water sources, familiar landmarks were catalogued mentally, and campsites were chosen with strategic foresight. The crew began to predict environmental patterns, anticipate seasonal changes, and integrate past observations into decisions about movement, foraging, and shelter construction. Knowledge accumulated not only as practical skill but also as confidence, a mental map of territory that could support survival, exploration, and future journeys. The edge of the world became increasingly familiar, yet it retained its sense of mystery and possibility. And so, life on the land unfolded as a continuous cycle of observation, action, and reflection. The Vikings learned to navigate a world that was simultaneously inviting and demanding, beautiful and challenging. Each day offered new insights, each night prompted reflection, and each step reinforced the integration of knowledge, skill, and perception. The edge of the world was no longer an abstract concept but a lived reality, rich in sensory detail, opportunity, and challenge. Through careful attention, patience, and collective effort, the Vikings transformed unfamiliar territory into a space of understanding, resilience, and profound connection with the environment. With the passing days, the Vikings' connection to the land deepened, and their understanding of this foreign environment grew more nuanced. Each morning, as the sun rose and painted the horizon with soft gold and rose hues, the crew awoke to a world that was simultaneously familiar and foreign. The gentle rustle of leaves in the wind, the distant calls of birds unknown to them, and the trickle of freshwater streams provided a sensory tapestry that shaped their perceptions. Every detail, no matter how small, was observed, considered, and incorporated into the growing mental map of the territory. Their awareness of the environment became both practical and meditative, an exercise in perception and adaptation that strengthened both mind and body. Exploration became a rhythm, a daily cycle of movement and observation. The Vikings divided themselves strategically. Some scouted nearby forests for edible plants, medicinal herbs, and suitable timber, while others patrolled streams and rivers, assessing water quality and fish populations. Still others mapped the terrain, noting hills, cliffs, and natural markers that could guide future journeys. Each action was deliberate, measured, and integrated into the collective knowledge of the group. No detail was too minor. Each observation had the potential to inform a critical decision or prevent a misstep in this unpredictable new world. The psychological dimension of their presence on the land remained significant. Weeks at sea had conditioned the crew to anticipate change, endure discomfort, and trust in collective skill. On land, these qualities were equally essential, yet they were tested in new ways. Unfamiliar terrain demanded attention to detail and spatial reasoning, while the unpredictability of wildlife required constant vigilance. The interplay between the known and unknown challenged the mind, requiring both creativity and logic. The edge of the world was no longer a distant concept or a navigational point. It was an ongoing exercise in perception, interpretation, and adaptation. Observation of the ecosystem revealed intricate relationships between flora, fauna, and terrain. Birds' flight patterns hinted at sources of freshwater, while animal tracks revealed feeding grounds and movement corridors. The distribution of plants indicated soil quality, sunlight exposure, and seasonal variations. Streams and ponds were studied not just for sustenance, but for understanding how water shaped the land and influenced the behavior of animals. Every element of the environment became a teacher, and the Vikings learned to interpret these lessons with patience, precision, and humility. The land itself was a guide, providing continuous feedback on choices, movements, and strategies. Foraging required both practical skill and careful experimentation. Identifying edible plants demanded attention to color, texture, and scent, while distinguishing poisonous varieties was a matter of life and death. Roots were carefully dug and examined, leaves were tasted cautiously, and fruits were sampled only after cross-referencing with prior knowledge. Streams were inspected for clarity, flow, and aquatic life, ensuring safe drinking water and potential fishing opportunities. Each foraging expedition reinforced lessons in observation, judgment, and patience, emphasizing the importance of respect for the land's resources while also cultivating trust in one's senses and knowledge. Shelter construction and maintenance became an ongoing exercise in adaptation. The Vikings used timber, leaves, moss, and stones to reinforce camps, carefully selecting sites that offered protection from wind, rain, and potential predators. Fire was maintained with diligence, balancing warmth, cooking needs, and safety. Temporary shelters were not merely functional, they reflected a growing understanding of the landscape, the behavior of natural elements, and the nuances of local materials. Each structure was both a practical solution and a lesson in observation, strategy, and teamwork. The act of building became a meditation, reinforcing both collective cohesion and individual focus. The land challenged the Vikings in unexpected ways. Sudden weather shifts demanded rapid adjustment, while hidden terrain features tested navigation skills. Streams could rise unexpectedly, animals could appear with little warning, and patches of dense forest or rocky ground required careful maneuvering. The crew's ability to observe, interpret, and respond was continuously honed, blending knowledge from home with immediate sensory feedback. Adaptation became not just a practical necessity, but a mental exercise, training attention, patience, and foresight. The edge of the world was a dynamic environment, offering lessons in resilience, strategy, and humility with every passing day. Social cohesion among the crew remained central to success. Tasks were divided according to skill, experience, and physical capacity, ensuring efficiency and safety. Knowledge was shared continuously. Observations about edible plants, water sources, animal behavior, and terrain features were communicated clearly and discussed. Decisions about movement, shelter placement, and foraging strategies were collaborative, balancing individual insight with collective wisdom. Trust, communication, and mutual attentiveness became essential, allowing the crew to navigate uncertainty with confidence and composure. The environment demanded cooperation, and in response, social bonds were strengthened, creating a resilient, interconnected group capable of facing challenges together. The contrast between land and sea continued to shape perception. The sea had offered an unbroken horizon, constant rhythm, and a fluid, changeable environment. Land, in contrast, was defined, complex, and layered, presenting challenges and opportunities in 3 dimensions. The Vikings adapted to this new mode of perception, integrating observation of elevation, vegetation, water, and wildlife into a coherent understanding of space. Patterns emerged gradually: which areas were safe, which plants were nutritious, which paths were navigable. Each day built upon the last, forming a comprehensive understanding that would guide exploration, settlement, and potential future voyages. Emotional and cognitive growth was intertwined with practical learning. The awe inspired by flowing streams, towering trees, and unknown wildlife fostered a deep appreciation for the world beyond home. Simultaneously, vigilance and caution reinforced discipline, focus, and strategic thinking. The edge of the world was as much a mental frontier as a physical one, demanding awareness, patience, and resilience. Each encounter with the environment reinforced the Vikings' capacity for observation, interpretation, and adaptive action, creating a layered understanding that bridged the imaginative stories of home with tangible, lived experience. The land offered continuous opportunities for learning. Patterns in plant growth suggested optimal areas for foraging and future settlement. Animal tracks indicated movement corridors, feeding grounds, and potential hazards. Streams and ponds revealed seasonal cycles and ecological dynamics. By the 12th day, the Vikings' relationship with the land had begun to transform from cautious exploration into thoughtful engagement. Each morning, as the sun rose and illuminated the terrain, they observed with a patience that was almost meditative. The interplay of light and shadow across hills, forests, and streams revealed subtle details that had previously gone unnoticed: the shimmer of dew on moss, the glint of water in hidden pools, and the movement of small animals beneath undergrowth. These observations became a quiet, daily ritual, fostering both awareness and a profound connection with the environment. The land, once alien, now invited engagement through careful attention and respect. Exploration continued with a deliberate rhythm. Some crew members focused on mapping the terrain, noting the location of streams, the density of forests, and the contours of hills and cliffs. Others scouted for food, testing the edibility of plants, assessing soil quality, and observing the behavior of animals. Every detail was recorded mentally, forming a cumulative understanding that guided movement and planning. The interplay between immediate observation and long-term strategy became increasingly sophisticated, highlighting the Vikings' ability to integrate past experience with present perception to navigate the unknown. Water sources remained central to daily life. Streams, ponds, and small lakes were carefully inspected not only for drinking but also for their potential as fishing spots. The movement of fish, subtle changes in current, and patterns in plant growth along the banks provided critical information about water quality and seasonal behavior. Tactile observation became key. The temperature of the water, the flow of current against fingers or feet, and the subtle variation in sediment all offered cues that guided both immediate action and future planning. Water, a source of life and a natural guide, demanded careful attention and fostered intimate knowledge of the surrounding environment. The crew also developed strategies for shelter that reflected a growing understanding of the landscape. Camps were located in areas that offered protection from wind, precipitation, and potential predators, while allowing convenient access to water and resources. Materials for construction were chosen with discernment. Timber was inspected for strength and flexibility, stones for stability, and foliage for insulation and camouflage. The act of building shelters became both a practical necessity and a lesson in environmental observation. Each decision reinforced knowledge of terrain, materials, and natural forces, creating a rhythm of thoughtful engagement with the land. Observation of flora and fauna deepened with repeated exposure. Birds' flight patterns suggested the location of water and food, while tracks of small mammals indicated movement corridors and feeding areas. Insects, seemingly insignificant, provided insights into seasonal cycles, soil quality, and the health of local vegetation. The Vikings combined sensory input, sight, sound, smell, and touch, with past knowledge, forming a layered understanding that informed decision-making. This attentiveness created a dynamic dialogue with the environment, where observation was both practical and contemplative, fostering awareness, adaptability, and respect. Foraging became increasingly sophisticated. The crew learned to differentiate subtle variations in leaves, stems, and fruit, distinguishing nutritious plants from those that could be harmful. Edible resources were gathered efficiently, with an eye toward sustainability and future availability. Streams and rivers were checked for aquatic life, while foraging patterns were adjusted according to time of day, weather, and animal activity. Each decision reflected both careful analysis and intuition, a combination that allowed the Vikings to maximize opportunity while minimizing risk. The act of gathering sustenance was a continuous lesson in observation, experimentation, and adaptation. The psychological impact of this ongoing engagement with the land was profound. Weeks at sea had developed endurance, rhythm, and coordination. The land demanded new layers of cognition and awareness. Every observation required interpretation, every decision integrated multiple variables, and every movement carried potential consequences. Mental maps expanded as landmarks were noted, natural patterns were observed, and seasonal behaviors of animals and plants were interpreted. The Vikings were not merely surviving, they were learning, adapting, and mastering a new domain. The edge of the world became a site of cognitive expansion as well as physical exploration. Evenings on the land provided opportunities for reflection and subtle learning. Campfires illuminated faces, hands, and tools, casting flickering shadows that reminded the crew of both presence and absence. Discussions emerged naturally. Insights were shared, discoveries were documented in memory, and strategies for the following day were planned. The quiet of night allowed observation to continue in subtler ways. The rustle of nocturnal animals, the movement of wind through branches, and the shifting of water in streams all contributed to understanding. Sleep was lighter yet restorative, a balance between vigilance and calm, allowing integration of the day's experiences. Social dynamics continued to play a vital role. Shared responsibility in foraging, mapping, shelter construction, and vigilance reinforced cohesion, trust, and communication. Observations and insights were pooled, and decisions were made collectively, allowing the crew to operate as an integrated unit. Each member's expertise and attentiveness contributed to the overall safety and success of the group. Collaboration enhanced both practical outcomes and cognitive development, as knowledge was refined, tested, and reinforced through discussion and application. The edge of the world demanded cooperation, and the Vikings responded by strengthening the social bonds that allowed them to thrive. The environment itself became a continuous instructor. Patterns in plant growth indicated optimal foraging zones, while animal tracks and behavior suggested both resources and hazards. Water flow, soil texture, and topographical variation guided movement, shelter selection, and strategic planning. Every detail, from the subtle color of moss to the angle of sunlight on a cliff face, provided insights that enhanced survival and understanding. Observation, reflection, and practical application became intertwined, creating a rhythm of learning that was both immersive and deeply calming. Over time, a routine of attentive engagement emerged. Mornings were devoted to exploration and observation, afternoons to practical applications such as foraging, shelter building, or water collection, and evenings to reflection, discussion, and rest. This rhythm allowed both physical needs and cognitive curiosity to be balanced, fostering resilience, adaptability, and continuous learning. The edge of the world was experienced in layers, through movement, observation, reflection, and social interaction. Each day added to a cumulative understanding, shaping perception, judgment, and decision-making in a holistic, integrated way. The Vikings' understanding of space became increasingly sophisticated. Hills, forests, streams, and rocky outcrops were not merely landmarks. They were dynamic features that informed movement, resource management, and risk assessment. Knowledge of the interplay between terrain, flora, fauna, and water systems allowed the crew to anticipate challenges, optimize foraging, and plan safe routes. The edge of the world was no longer defined as a single boundary. It was a continuum of patterns, relationships, and observations that required active engagement, reflection, and adaptation. Emotional engagement with the environment grew alongside practical understanding. The beauty of flowing water, the rustle of leaves, and the fleeting glimpses of wildlife evoked awe, while awareness of potential hazards cultivated vigilance. Curiosity, respect, and attentiveness were intertwined, producing a state of calm alertness that enhanced perception and decision-making. Each discovery, no matter how small, reinforced confidence and deepened the sense of connection to this new world. The edge of the world was simultaneously a teacher, a challenge, and a source of inspiration. Through sustained attention, reflection, and collaboration, the Vikings transformed unfamiliar terrain into a comprehensible, navigable, and habitable space. The land provided continuous lessons in observation, adaptation, and resilience. Every step, glance, and interaction contributed to understanding, integrating sensory experience with inherited knowledge and logical inference. The edge of the world was no longer an abstract concept or distant story. It was a lived, tangible reality, rich in sensory detail, cognitive challenge, and opportunity. Each day, each observation, and each decision reinforced mastery, connection, and wonder. As dawn broke across the strange horizon, a gentle mist curled above the land, wrapping the trees and shoreline in a quiet, ethereal veil. The air was cool and clean, filled with the faint scent of pine and salt. The Vikings stood in silence, gazing at the world before them, realizing that their long journey, filled with storms, hunger, doubt, and discovery, had brought them not just to the edge of a map, but to the edge of understanding itself. The unknown had transformed them. What once inspired fear now stirred awe. What once felt distant and unreachable now felt intimate, almost sacred. The land no longer seemed to resist them. It seemed to listen, as if acknowledging their presence. The men spoke softly as they prepared to depart, their voices blending with the whisper of the wind. They gathered the few items they had taken from the earth, smooth stones, carved wood, a handful of seeds, and left behind signs of their passage that would be swallowed by time. There was no sense of conquest in their movements, no need to claim or possess. What they had found here could not be owned. It could only be remembered. Their discovery was not of gold or treasure, but of perspective, a recognition that the world was larger, quieter, and more mysterious than they had ever imagined. They watched as the tide rose, the sea reaching out to meet them like an old friend. The water shimmered under the rising light, reflecting the vastness of the sky above. The longship, resting at the edge of the shore, seemed smaller than ever, fragile against the infinite horizon. Yet it was enough. It had carried them across storms and silence, through fear and revelation. The ocean that had once felt merciless now appeared almost compassionate, as if it too had changed during the voyage. The rhythm of waves seemed slower, more deliberate, as though the sea understood what they had endured. When they finally pushed away from the shore, the oars entered the water with a soft, steady rhythm. No one spoke for a long while. The landscape receded, swallowed by fog and distance, but it did not vanish from their minds. Each man carried a fragment of it within, a sound, a scent, an image of pale grass beneath mist or the curve of a distant hill. They knew they would speak of it differently when they returned home. Some would call it a new world. Others would describe it as the edge of all things. But all would remember it as something beyond words, a place that had changed the way they understood life itself. As the day unfolded, the sea stretched endlessly before them, vast and quiet. The men rowed with calm precision, their movements synchronized, their hearts steadied by what they had seen. The journey home would be long, but they no longer measured distance as they once had. They had crossed not just the width of an ocean, but the boundary between fear and wonder. The world was larger now, but so were they. And as the ship slipped over the water, carried by the wind and tide, it seemed that they were not leaving the edge of the world at all. They were carrying it with them, wherever they would go. As dawn spread across the horizon, the Vikings stood in silence, watching the mist rise from the edge of the world they had once feared. What began as a journey into the unknown had become a lesson in patience, observation, and transformation. They had discovered not gold or conquest, but understanding, a quiet revelation that the world was far larger, more intricate, and more connected than they had ever imagined. As they prepared to leave, each man carried with him not just memories of strange lands and endless seas, but the profound stillness of discovery itself.